I want to start with your book title. Is it actually possible to change your personality?
So, a personality change, I think, is possible, but you have to really want to do it. You have to kind of change your daily habits and behaviors and thought patterns in order to actually achieve true personality change. Extroversion is a good example of this. So, when I first started trying to meet more people and be more extroverted, it was very, very going through the motionsy, right? I had to force myself to leave the house. I had to force myself to go to improv. I was dreading it a lot of the time. But kind of over time, what I found is that, first of all, I enjoyed these experiences a lot more than I thought I would. And I kind of started to change this notion of myself as a hardened introvert who never needed social interaction. I was like, well, I did that and it was really fun, and I did that and it was really fun. Maybe I actually enjoy this. And so you kind of start to shift your own concept of yourself as you rack up these new experiences.
Hey everyone, I'm Jean Chatsky, host of the HerMoney podcast, the podcast for women by women, because we understand that when it comes to money, women have unique challenges and we need unique advice. Today we are talking about something just as personal as our personal finances, who we are. So let me ask you, are you an introvert or an extrovert? If you're an introvert, do you ever wish that you could step outside your comfort zone just a little bit more? And if you're an extrovert, do you sometimes feel that you need to hit the pause button on life? Well, my guest today, Olga Khazan, spent a year changing her personality. Yes, really, to become a little less introverted. And she is here to show us how we can make small, powerful changes to become the best versions of ourselves. If you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. We post new episodes each week. Olga, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
I want to start with your book title. Is it actually possible to change your personality, or are we all just simply making adjustments to borrow a page from the show Severance, the you are?
Well, I think both. Personality change, I think, is possible, but you have to really want to do it. So you have to kind of change your daily habits and behaviors and thought patterns in order to actually achieve true personality change. But what that will look like kind of day to day is basically just adjustments to the you that you are. So what you'll notice is maybe a slight reduction in anxiety, or a slightly, grown or expanded social circle. You might notice deepening relationships, but it'll still be your same life.
What's the difference in your mind between personality change and habit change?
Personality change is sort of it encompasses a little bit more than habits. So it's habit, but it's also kind of like your mindset and your thoughts around things, and sort of the stories that you tell yourself about yourself and other people. So I would say that it's almost like a little bit deeper than habit. It's not just going through the motions. It's also sort of like buying into the motions, if that makes sense.
So essentially, for a little while, we are just us with new skills or new habits, but eventually the compounding effect, to borrow a term from investing, is what drives that bigger change. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, that's right. So basically you start with the behavior. So extroversion is a good example of this. So when I first started trying to kind of meet more people and be more extroverted, it was very going through the motionsy, right? I had to force myself to leave the house. I had to force myself to go to improv. I was dreading it a lot of the time. But kind of over time, what I found is that, first of all, I enjoyed these experiences a lot more than I thought I would. And I kind of started to change this notion of myself as a hardened introvert who never needed social interaction. I was like, well, I did that and it was really fun, and I did that and it was really fun, and I did that and it was really fun. So maybe I actually enjoy this. And so you kind of start to shift your own concept of yourself as you rack up these new experiences.
Let's rewind to the beginning of this process for you. What was going on in your life where you felt like you needed to shake things up? What was happening that drove you to try to make a big change?
Yeah, I noticed that my life was not that bad. In fact, it was quite good. And now, as a new parent, some of the incidents that I describe in the book, honestly, they seem really great to me. Like, and I would love a day like that at this point. But so things like a bad haircut or getting stuck in traffic or just the mild annoyances, they would really kind of make me crumble to pieces. They would make me kind of really just have a huge meltdown and kind of chalk it up as like a horrible day. On top of that, I was feeling really socially isolated, partly because of COVID, but not just because of COVID. And I kind of just wanted to shake up my life a little. I wanted to appreciate what I had and actually enjoy my life as opposed to just kind of enduring it and kind of gritting my teeth.
One of the nuggets that I pulled from the book was that you actually said you were feeling neurotic, and that some research estimates that just a small reduction in neuroticism feels like earning $314,000 more a year. That is a really specific piece of data. So can you unpack it?
Yeah. So I also didn't believe that at first, but I looked at the study and that is true. I think the reason why a small reduction in neuroticism feels so good is that neuroticism feels really bad. So neuroticism, just to back up, is the personality trait that's associated with anxiety and depression. And if you think about it, people who are really high in neuroticism, they just get stuck in really negative thought patterns kind of over and over again. So there's a lot of catastrophizing, there's a lot of dread and fear and worry. And so being free from some of that and thinking that things might actually be okay can feel like a huge burden lifted. It can feel like a huge pay raise.
One of the things that I think is so fascinating about this research is that it's actually small tweaks in personality traits, like being a little more conscientious or a little more outgoing or a little less neurotic, that have major impacts on your happiness, on your success. What's the science behind the small driving the large?
Yeah, so really, these personality traits are a spectrum. So researchers don't really think of personality in terms of like categories as much anymore. So like the Myers-Briggs, like INTJ type thing, they're kind of moving away from that. And it's more about where you are on the spectrum of each of the personality traits. So in general, being a little bit higher on all of them, and for neuroticism, that means being not neurotic, weirdly. It means being high in emotional stability, which is like the opposite of neuroticism. Being high in all of those traits is associated with better health, longevity, earning more money, better relationships, just sort of health and well-being. If you think about it, if you can adjust your personality, if you can become a little bit more extroverted or a little bit more agreeable, a little bit more conscientious, those can actually net really big changes. And the reason why you don't need to like flip the switch completely and become the extreme of that trait is because it's actually not that healthy to be like 100% high on those. So if you think about someone who's like 100% conscientious, it can be like kind of obsessive compulsive. It can be also not super healthy. So you just want to kind of slide along the middle there.
It's so funny. You made me think of this study. I was doing a deep dive into money and happiness a while back, and there was a piece of research that asked people to rate themselves in terms of how happy they are or how optimistic they are on a scale of 1 to 10. And it turned out the 8s were where you wanted to be. Like, you didn't want to be a 10 because the 10s were a little too blissed out, right? They just believed that everything was going to be okay, when we know in reality everything is not always going to be okay. And sometimes you have to deal with the things that are problematic. But this feels kind of like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's like this interesting concept in research on anxiety called the Yerkes-Dodson principle, which is that you don't want to be completely not anxious, right? Like you don't want to be someone who has so little anxiety that you don't actually do anything. You also don't want to be like so anxious that you are like paralyzed with indecision. You want to be somewhere in the middle there, like that, like kind of parabola shape. You want to be kind of somewhere in the middle where it's like you have some anxiety, you have a little bit of like get up and go kind of feeling, but it's not so much that you're just like can't do anything. So that applies to a lot of the traits.
You met a researcher in the book, Nathan Hudson, and he explains that personality is what helps you get what you want in life. We all want different things. Sometimes we live for fun. Sometimes we want to acquire power or prestige. So my question is, can we change or shift our personalities throughout our long lives, depending on what we want at that particular point in time?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the kind of the reasons to do personality change is to accomplish some goal. So the people that I interviewed who did successfully change their personalities, they usually had something they were working toward that trait was beneficial for. So one of the people I interviewed was like a college student who was very unprepared for college. He had never written a paper before. He had never really studied, but he kind of decided in college that he really wanted to become a psychologist, like a professional psychologist. And he knew he would have to write lots of papers and go to graduate school and take the GREs. So he literally became more conscientious. He bought a book called like How to Make A's or yeah, How to Get A's. And he studied with a friend. He made flashcards, the whole 9 yards. And he wasn't doing that stuff just because he was like, conscientiousness as a trait is compelling to me. He was like, I have this goal. I want to accomplish it. This is how I will do it. It's through this personality trait. And that I found is the case with a lot of people and in various ways. That trait is like a tool to get them where they want.
Did you find that people could use these tactics and these tools to become better with money, that they could become better savers, or that they could get themselves to the point where they were paying more attention to their investments?
I think one tactic in particular that could be useful for this is this idea called episodic future thinking, which is where you kind of very vividly imagine the future down to like very specific details. So things like, what are you going to buy with the money that you save? Let's say you're saving up for a car. What will it feel like to drive the car? Where will you drive to? Who are you going to have sitting, in the passenger seat? Kind of these very specific images that help make that goal more desirable or more motivating for you to work toward. And people did that for different types of goals, like starting their own business or like that aforementioned guy for becoming a psychologist. But that's something that works really well whenever you have a lot of temptations in the short term and you're really trying to plan for that long term. Just make that kind of vision of yourself in the future very vivid so that you kind of are more inspired to work toward it.
I mean, there's a lot of behavioral finance research that points to if you can not only see your goal, but you name your goal and you have pictures of your goal, it's a lot easier to work toward your goal because the future is so squishy for so many people. When you were going through the process, you did a number of things to try to change your personality and get out of your comfort zone. And I want to talk about the improv class. And many people would say, no way am I getting up there? But you found it was actually one of your more successful activities. Why was that?
Yeah, so I will say there was like a commitment element to it. You can't skip more than a certain number of improv classes. In the class that I took, I think it was like 2 classes or something. So you had to go even if you didn't feel like it. So I definitely recommend this for introverts who feel like they really don't want to leave the house ever. Like if you just make plans with friends, let's get drinks, like it'll be too easy to back out basically. So I would definitely sign up for something where you have to commit, you have to go. And then once I was there, I found that it really, first of all, it was a lot more fun than I expected. Something kind of funny or amusing would happen almost every time. Even if I was really tired at the end of the day, which I often was, something about it would wake me up a little bit more than just watching TV or something like that. And also because everyone there is acting really silly and is a little bit insecure about it, it wasn't as scary to act silly in front of them. It's not like you're the only one acting silly. It just turned out a lot better than I expected.
This morning, before we taped this show, I went to the gym. I joined my gym after moving to a new city because I was feeling isolated and I needed people. like people that I actually saw. So I now have this group of great gym friends, and we were trying to make plans for a birthday, one of our friends' birthdays, and we all pulled out our phones and we all looked at our calendars, and it was a nightmare. And I was taken with the fact that one of the things that you were challenging yourself to do was to try to make new friends. But you also have written that one of our problems is that we don't see the friends that we already have. How do we make more space for that?
So one of the people that I talked to on this journey, I guess, is Kat Velos. And she wrote a whole book about kind of making friends and deepening friendships. And she's like a friendship expert. But one tip that I took away from her is that, like, oftentimes we put a lot of pressure on meeting up with friends. It has to be in a bar, it has to be multiple hours, it has to be a time that works for everyone, planned way in advance. Something that I started doing after this project is just like texting people, like, I have a little kid, so like, hey, want to have a play date for like 1 hour this afternoon, right? No one has to dress up, no one has to clean their house, no one has to like drive anywhere, they all live nearby. Like, it's something that's like very low stakes that can be done really easily. And I think that even if it's not a play date, maybe it's just like, hey, want to come walk around the block? Want to come meet up at this coffee shop exactly halfway between our houses? I just think the stakes need to be set way lower.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I've found that the thing that works is either having plans way in advance. I have a group of women that I've met here in Philadelphia. We have a no book group, no pressure. We don't have to read anything. We don't have to cook anything. We just go out for dinner, but it's always on the third Thursday of the month. So we all know exactly when it's going to be. But the other thing that works is just texting a friend and saying, hey, do you want to walk the dog? Right? I'm going to walk the dog now. Do you want to come with me and walk the dog? And the nice thing about walking the dog is that it doesn't cost anything.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And just finding things that are free. And one thing I really liked about Kat's advice is that, like, people get in their heads about inviting their friends over unless they like make their house perfect first. But if that person is really going to be your friend, why do you need to make your house look like it doesn't normally look?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if you're a hoarder, maybe declutter a little bit, but they're going to see a lot of sides of you that are like messier than your house, probably. So I don't know. I stopped cleaning my house basically before people came over.
I love that you have given yourself permission to do that. As somebody who cleans up before the housekeeper comes, I definitely need to break that habit. We're going to take a very quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about the permanent changes that you've made since completing this experiment. And we are back with Olga Khazan, author of Me, But Better. Your colleague Ellen Cushing wrote an article in The Atlantic that recently went viral, and she wrote about the fact that Americans just aren't going to parties anymore. Only 4% of Americans, she said, attended or hosted a social event on an average weekend or holiday in 2023, which was a 35% decrease from 2004. Is that just a COVID hangover, or do you think something else is going on where we're not entertaining anymore?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think there's so many reasons for that. So first of all, inflation, it's just like honestly very expensive to host parties. I also think people just aren't as close. They don't have as many friends and like neighbors that they're friendly with and that they would have get-togethers with. And also, like, it just feels like, again, that the stakes are like very high. Like, it's very, I don't know. I find that, like, if I truly want to have a gathering at my house, I have to send out like formal invitations at least 3 weeks in advance. And there has to be a pretty good reason for people to come, at least a birthday or something like that. It can't just be random. I live in the suburbs, so it's probably different for people who live in cities, but I've hosted one party at my house since I moved in 5 years ago. And I mean, it was successful, I guess, but I was like, I cannot do this with any regularity.
No, I totally know what you mean. I mean, I have friends in for dinner, but I've had a party on my mind, like we should have a party for 2 years, and I have done pretty much nothing about it because it does feel like a lot, like it's a lot. Although if you just have people and ask everybody to bring something, you kind of have a party and everybody will just be happy to. My theory on this is if you're feeding people, they are just not going to complain.
Yeah, I mean, so I hope. A friend of mine has started this tradition where of dinner and a movie, like she has people over for dinner and we watch a movie. And the first time she tried to do it, she emailed like an invite to a bunch of people, I guess like a week in advance, and no one said yes. And I kind of think, I don't know, I think there's like a little bit of a social reclusion kind of like thing going on where people don't really want to get out of their little hidey holes, especially in the winter. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So I know that your life has changed since you embarked on this experiment. You have a baby, things are different. What strategies did you find that actually helped you stick with some of these new habits that you found that you liked, particularly as you're going through so many changes in your own life?
The big one for extroversion was I just realized that like often when I'm feeling sad and out of sorts, it's not a sign that I need to socialize less. It's a sign that I need to socialize more. It's a sign that I need to seek connection, which was kind of a big realization for me. And now I would say I just like reach out a lot more. Like I just kind of text people like, hey, want to get together, want to get together. Whereas before it was something I like way overthought. I was like, oh, that person didn't respond within like a day. That means they don't want to. I'm not going to text them again until they text me. I did a lot of that kind of thing. And now I just am like, let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. My house or yours. Which has been really helpful as a new parent because it can get very lonely and isolating.
A couple of times during this conversation, you've described things that make me think that you're no longer an introvert, right? You described the improv class being sort of a recharger of your batteries. You just described needing to be with people to get happier. And when I think about introverts, I think of people who need to be alone to recharge, but that's not what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that was something that I realized during this is that I am not as introverted as I thought I was, at least, and that I'm maybe not like a classic introvert at all. I think it was more like I was like, well, I'm alone all the time. I must like being alone. I'm an introvert was sort of my thought process. But,
You're just a writer.
yeah, I guess I just have a lot of work to do. But I think this really did show me that even when it seems easier to be alone, it's often better to be with other people, if that makes sense.
For people who are just starting here, for people who are listening to this conversation and thinking, yeah, I'd like to shake it up a little bit. I'd like to be me, but better. I mean, who wouldn't want that? Where would you suggest that they start? What's one or two just small things that we can take away from this conversation and try to incorporate in the next day or so?
I would sign up for something. Sign up for either a class or an activity or some sort of recurring commitment that you have to go to. It doesn't have to be expensive. It can be free. It can be a meetup. But just sign up for one thing that it is not super easy to back out of and just see how you like it.
The book is Me, But Better, The Science and Promise of Personality Change. Olga, if people are looking for more info on you, on the book, where would you send them?
I'm a writer at The Atlantic, which is theatlantic.com. And you can also find me at my Substack, which is olgahazan.substack.com. Twitter, Blue Sky, and kind of the same everywhere.
Amazing. Thanks so much for doing this with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.